What if the most powerful man in the world came face to face with the line between glory and madness in a single night? Before the fall, there was a dream; before the madness, a warning. At the height of his power, when nothing seemed to threaten his empire, he saw something that silenced him from the inside out. A vision so intense, it made his soul tremble. A massive tree, reaching the heavens, but marked for destruction. Someone, or something, descended from the skies with a verdict. What Nebuchadnezzar saw before losing his mind wasn't just a dream, it was a direct warning from above, a sacred touch upon the human mind, a vision so deep, it tore through his awareness and laid his soul bare before heaven. What Nebuchadnezzar saw before going mad reveals the exact moment when the Lord breaks his silence and puts a man's sanity to the test. And next, this dream would begin to shatter his reality, and this time, it wouldn't speak in metaphors. And by the end of this story, you won't be able to help but be blown away by the incredible transformation that unfolds. Sleep didn't come as a relief that night. There was no peace, no forgetting. What fell upon the king was a kind of shadowy wakefulness disguised as a dream. He didn't wake up startled. He woke in silence, the kind only someone who has seen too much can keep. The image appeared slowly. A tree. But not just any tree. It rose from the middle of the earth in sheer magnificence. Its trunk was thick as fortress walls, its branches stretched wide like the ambition of an empire, and its crown touched the heavens. Everything lived under its shade: people, animals, entire nations. It gave food, it offered shelter, and everything seemed to exist at its mercy. But something in that perfect scene was unbearably tense, like a single off-key note in an otherwise flawless melody. And then, he saw it. The atmosphere shifted. The sky, which had only watched in silence, now tore open, and from it descended someone, not a man, not an ordinary figure. Scripture calls him a watcher, an angel, a messenger bearing the authority of heaven. But there was no comfort in his presence. He came with words that landed like blades. Cut down the tree. The decree came with no explanation, the heavens gave no reason. What once stood tall now trembled beneath a voice from on high. The base was to remain, but bound, the roots untouched, the rest gone. Branches, fruit, leaves, shelter, all would vanish. The terror wasn't just in the loss, it was in the precision, in the cold, unshakable way that judgment was delivered. The tree would fall, not by enemies, not by rebellion, but by a higher command, one no power on earth could resist. The king, who had issued so many decrees, now heard one he could not revoke. There were no counselors, no escape, only the sentence, and the emptiness it left behind. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Even awake, he still saw the tree, still heard the voice, still felt the dream wasn't over. And maybe, it wasn't. The silence in the room was heavy, as if the echo of the heavenly sentence still lingered. The king, though awake, remained a prisoner of the vision. He wasn't looking for rest, he was looking for answers, and in the face of such deep disturbance, only one man could be called. An exile, a prophet, someone who, years earlier, had already deciphered what others couldn't begin to grasp. Daniel enters, not as a courtier, nor a subject, but as someone who knows the weight of heaven's decisions. His eyes don't show fear, but carry a quiet hesitation. He listens. The story comes straight from the king's lips. Not a word is interrupted, not a detail is missed, and when silence returns, it stays, long, thick, suffocating. The tension is palpable. There are no outbursts or pleas, only two men. One holds the power of an empire, the other carries the truth of a vision. Daniel hesitates, the light fades from his face. His shoulders grow heavy, because he knows, there are words that, once spoken, can never be taken back. The interpretation lands like a verdict. The tree is the king, majestic, strong, undeniable. But it will be cut down, not by enemies, the blow will come from above. the man will become what he most despises: irrational, beast-like, wild. He will live among animals, eat what they eat. He will lose his reason, his dignity, his throne. Everything will be suspended, until, and only if, he acknowledges that there is a king above all kings. There is no comfort in Daniel's voice. The king, so used to being feared, now must decide what to do with what he's just heard. The room stays silent, a silence of choices, a silence filled with risk. But truth, even when revealed, doesn't guarantee transformation. Pride knows how to pretend it listened, and keep moving as if nothing had been said. And that silence, it set the stage for the crash that was coming, and when that crash finally arrives, it won't knock politely. A whole year passed quietly over Babylon. The city kept thriving, the empire stood firm, and on the throne, the same man. No one dared to recall the dream, no advisor mentioned the warning, but there was a kind of silent tension in the air. Then came the day, unannounced, yet foreseen, a day like any other, until he climbed up there. The palace terrace, offering a contemplative view of the hanging gardens, also gave him a full display of the glory he had built. From impossible architecture to unmatched military power, everything pointed to one name: Nebuchadnezzar. And he heard it, not from subjects, not from priests, but from his own lips. "Isn't this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" There was no irony, no hesitation, only the conviction of a man who felt untouchable. The echo of his words had barely left his mouth when heaven, silent for months, answered. The sentence fell like a blade, precise, unstoppable, invisible. Something within him shattered, his gaze drifted, his mind disconnected from his body. The king unraveled, reason slipped through his fingers like sand, and where a monarch once stood, something else began to take shape. He didn't fall with screams, he fell with the hush of someone who no longer knows the difference between ground and throne. No warrior touched him, no enemy dethroned him, it was his own glory that pushed him from the heights, and while the halls of the palace remained grand, Nebuchadnezzar the man began to fade, began his descent into oblivion. And so, as if something ancient had awakened, the decree stepped out from the shadows, and it began to take shape. But what seemed like the end was a transition, because the presence that had sentenced him was still watching, and for a long time, would not let him go. That face no longer bore the expression of a king. What now wandered the outskirts of the city was a being detached from time, glory, and reason. He recognized no names, made no distinction between shadow and shelter. He slept where he fell, ate whatever he found, and howled at the sky as if trying to speak with something far beyond human language, and yet, he was not alone. The presence that had descended in the dream, that watcher, had not returned to the heights. He hadn't been sent merely to deliver a message, he remained, invisible but present, unshaken, like a sentinel who doesn't need to speak to be heard, like eyes that never close. The palace, once alive with the commands of a single man, now held a void. No one else took the throne, no decrees were issued, Babylon itself seemed suspended in time, frozen between a glorious past and an uncertain future. The king's absence was never announced, but his absence was felt, first in the corridors, then in the streets, eventually at the edges of the empire, but no one asked questions, because silence had become part of the official order. Meanwhile, far from the halls and ceremonies, the man who once ruled the world was being reshaped in the pain of anonymity. There were no crowns, no titles, only the gaze of the one who watches without blinking. Not every fall ends at the ground, some continue, until the soul, stripped of all it clung to, is finally touched by something untouched by the obsession for thrones. But there comes a point when madness stops being confusion, and becomes a dwelling, and that's exactly where he was being led. What followed couldn't be called life. 7 years unfolded without measure, each day a worse version of the last. There was no shelter, no name, only a body withering under the sun and howling at the moon. His skin toughened like exposed leather, and his untouched nails curved like claws. But the most terrifying thing wasn't what was seen, it was what was heard, roars that escaped his mouth but were born in the soul. Among the animals, he moved, not like one of them, but like something that unsettled even their wildest instincts. There was something in his eyes, when they could focus for even a second, that stirred fear, a kind of ancient madness, almost primal, and yet unbroken. Around the edges of the empire, the rumors began. Shepherds claimed to have seen a wild, ragged figure with hollow eyes, walking on all fours and vanishing into the morning mist. Others swore they heard cries mixing a human voice with the growl of a tormented beast, and at the center of it all, Babylon waited. The throne remained empty, the priests silent, the generals restrained. There was no rebellion, because even in absence, something of Nebuchadnezzar's authority still hung over the walls. The entire empire was on pause, held hostage by a void no one knew how to fill. Meanwhile, under the open sky, far from gold and majesty, the man was disappearing, layer by layer. But at the heart of that unraveling, a spark endured, faint, silent, stubborn, and on that barren ground, suddenly, something began to rise from the dust. After years submerged in a primal silence, something finally stirred within him. A memory, a name that echoed without shape, but with weight, a sense that existence hadn't ended, it had only fallen asleep beneath layers of instinct. And then, he heard it, an indistinct sound, like a presence, a whisper cutting through the delirium. It was intimate, yet unfamiliar. It didn't come from outside, but it wasn't entirely his either. It was as if his long-buried consciousness was being pulled back to the surface. And with it came pain, the pain of seeing what he had become. The beast hesitated, his body trembled. For a moment, he didn't know if he was roaring or weeping. The voice didn't press, and each time he realized he could still remember, something realigned inside him, fragments, forgotten words, ancient faces. The sound of his own humanity trying to resurface. There was no declared redemption, not yet, but there was a conflict, the first in years, as if inside that twisted form, two worlds were now occupying the same space, the beast, and the man it had tried to erase. This time, the desert no longer felt so silent. Something there, in that fragile border between ending and return, was about to break through what was left of the darkness, and what was rising from that shadow would no longer be the same creature, nor the same man. What walked back toward the gates of Babylon was not the same figure that had vanished down its corridors. Those who saw him first hesitated. A man coming from the desert, thick beard, skin marked by sun and wind, hollow eyes. His steps were steady, yet restrained. "I am Nebuchadnezzar." The words met no applause, only silence, and eyes filled with disbelief. Some froze, others stepped back, no one moved forward. The palace, untouched for 7 years, now seemed to resist the idea that this man had truly returned. The gates stood open, but the empire itself seemed unsure whether to let him back in. Then he spoke, and his voice, once accustomed to command, now carried something even the generals did not recognize. There was authority, yes, but the kind born from knowing one's own limits. Words chosen carefully, no rush, no force, just truth. One by one, those who doubted fell silent. What stood before them was no longer the same king, but something time, the desert, and heaven had reshaped. He did not ask for the throne, he did not demand allegiance, he simply bore witness. And there, before the kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar reappeared, but the one who returned, no one had ever seen before. There was something sealed within him, like a flame the desert had failed to extinguish, and when he opened his mouth, heaven finally spoke through a man. His voice rose through the wind. He didn't proclaim a speech or issue a decree, he revealed something far rarer in kings: reverence. "I praised the Most High, I honored and glorified him who lives forever." No general announced his presence, no priest handed him prepared words. The declaration came from a man who had been both king and beast, a man who had descended to the lowest place a throne can ever take someone, the place of realizing that no throne stands unless allowed by the God who reigns above all. There were no cheering crowds, but heaven's courts bore witness. It was the same body, but a different voice, a different soul, a different essence. The one who had tasted dust now stood as living proof that the Most High doesn't just judge, he transforms. He doesn't just bring down, he rebuilds. Before the people, he exalted divine sovereignty. He didn't declare his dominion, he declared his dependence, and in that act, something reversed. What had looked like humiliation now shimmered with glory, the glory of the Almighty God. Babylon, built to reflect the power of a man, now heard from that same man that all power is borrowed, all strength is temporary, and every glory that refuses to bow, will be bowed. The reverent silence that followed was one of awe, not uncertainty. This wasn't just a confession, it was a testimony from one who had faced judgment, and returned not to justify himself, but to surrender. In that moment, the throne was restored to its king, restored by grace, not by conquest, and the voice of the emperor at last echoed a truth no time can erase. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. But the story didn't end there, because the most extraordinary part wasn't the restoration of the throne, it was the transformation of the man. Nebuchadnezzar returned to the palace, but left in the field the version of himself that had led to his ruin, and the one who came back was someone capable of glorifying not himself, but the God who sustained him even in madness. That's what makes this story so alive. It reminds us that the fall is never the final word for those who choose to lift their eyes. The same heaven that witnesses the fall also signs the restoration, and the God who judges is still the God who restores. Nebuchadnezzar saw himself, but only when everything had collapsed, only when the crown was gone, the power lost, and the control stripped away. In us, how many of us could truly face ourselves if God revealed our real inner condition today? This isn't just a distant tale about a restored king. It's an urgent reminder that no ruin is too deep for God to rebuild, that pride always comes before the fall, but surrender comes before the miracle. So, what did you think of this story? If you found value in it, like this video and share in the comments what impacted you most. That lets YouTube know you appreciate content like this, and it helps deliver more stories just like it to you. And don't stop here. In the description and at the end of this video, there's another story waiting, maybe with the answer you've been looking for. Keep going, because this story was never just about Nebuchadnezzar, it's about each one of us who, even after the fall, can still choose to lift our eyes. And for those who lift their eyes, there is always hope.